9 members of the same family in Afghanistan died following a drone strike that was done by the United States in order to essentially target a member of ISIS-K who posed an imminent threat to people in the Kabul airport. Now, that is what the Pentagon is alleging, but when you look at the number of casualties here, innocent lives that are lost, it gives you a sense of just how often and how brazenly the United States engages in these drone strikes, which leads to literal children being killed. So let me give you the details. The US Central Command claims that the target posed an imminent threat, as I mentioned, to the airport as the US continues to rush to evacuate people. Now, the youngest civilian who was killed in this drone strike, and it was the second drone strike, by the way, in recent days, was a 2-year-old girl, according to the brother of one of those killed. They were an ordinary family, he said. We are not ISIS or Daesh and this was a family home where my brothers lived with their families. The other children who were killed in this drone strike were ages 3, 4, 9, and 10. In fact, one neighbor spoke of the family and told CNN, quote, "All the neighbors tried to help and brought water to put out the fire. And I saw that there were 5 or 6 people dead. The father of the family and another young boy, and there were 2 young children. They were dead. They were in pieces. There were also 2 wounded. And by the way, I should note that the United States is trying to make it appear as though the drone strike is not necessarily to blame for the death of this family, 9 members of this one family. By the way, the total number of civilian casualties is 10, as far as we know. It could go up. Now, the US, as I mentioned, is trying to make it seem like, well, the initial drone strike might not be the cause of the civilian fatalities here. Bill Urban, a spokesperson for the US Central Command, argued that, quote, "We know that there were substantial and powerful subsequent explosions resulting from the destruction of the vehicle," meaning the vehicle that they targeted with the explosives and the alleged terrorist, "indicating a large amount of explosive material inside that may have caused additional casualties. It is unclear what may have happened and we are investigating further. We would be deeply saddened by any potential loss of innocent life." And let me be clear, it's not potential loss of innocent life. Innocent people were killed, civilians were killed, including several children, ages 2, 3, 4, 9, and 10. Cenk.
Yeah, so there's 2 elements to this story. One is the substance of what American foreign policy, the other is how American media covers it. Later, we're gonna do a story about how the Taliban has taken over media in Afghanistan. There's guys with rifles standing behind the newscaster, right? But our guys are way, way more subtle than that. But their framing is, well, nefarious nonetheless. So let me explain. So first of all, 7 kids dead. If ISIS had killed 7 kids, let alone all the other civilians, how would the American media frame that? Brutal killers, ISIS. Well, ISIS would say, well, we did it for our own purposes, to achieve our purposes. And we, of course, think those purposes are horrible, right? But America says the same thing. We're doing it to achieve our purposes. But the difference is the media says rightfully, well, ISIS's purposes are absurd. And you can't kill 7 kids to achieve your purpose. That's not a right ends to a mean, or right means to an end, I should say. But when America does it, the media immediately takes it as, well, I mean, it was means to an end. They had to achieve their purpose. They were trying to attack an ISIS bomber. It turns out there was a family nearby and they all exploded and their body parts were, the report explains it, body parts of the kids strewn all over the place.
I mean, when you really think about it though, Cenk, the US government is at least consistent, and I'm not giving them brownie points for this, but they are consistent in regard to targeting who they want to target, regardless of the innocent lives that will be lost in whatever drone strike or whatever bombing they do. I mean, they defend the Israeli government over and over and over again when hospitals are bombed or when schools are bombed, either in the Gaza Strip or the West Bank. And the argument that they make is that, well, you have Hamas fighters who are using these innocent civilians as human shields. And as a result, we gotta do what we gotta do. We gotta target what we believe to be a threat. And so that's exactly what the US government is doing here, right? They refer to civilian casualties as collateral damage. This is a long-standing phrase that's been used in regard to literal children who have died as a result of these drone strikes or missile strikes or whatever their preferred weapon of choice is when they carry out these missions. But there are consequences to that.
Yeah, and so guys, it's easy to understand if you put the shoe on the other foot. So for example, in America here, every once in a while we do an easement. So a highway needs to go through that property, we need to buy that property, and so we're gonna give you a certain amount of money to compensate you for it. Now, a lot of times people are furious about that because it sometimes is used for the wall, sometimes it's used for a mall, right? And people say that's taking my freedom away. Now imagine if the government said, hey look, there's some dangerous people in your neighborhood, so we had to murder 7 of your kids. Oh, it's not a big deal, it's just an easement. It's collateral damage. We had to murder 7 of your kids. Now, who in America would accept that? No one, no one. It would be up in arms, it would be the biggest scandal in history. We take 7 kids in one bombing. By the way, we've killed thousands upon thousands of children through our drone strikes. And it's barely noted. Again, CNN calls it, the US carried a defensive airstrike in Kabul. Well, if they say so, right? Well, it seemed pretty offensive to that family, not just defensive. So we value their lives and their kids' lives a lot less. Now, that's obvious. There's no question about that. Even if you're a right-winger, you're probably agreeing, saying, yeah, but I didn't want them to attack. And if a family had to be killed, at least it protects me or our service members. And so hence, I don't care. But you can't argue that we don't kill them and on a regular basis and with little deference for their lives. And you can't argue that we wouldn't do it here in America if we just dropped a bomb and murdered a family like that and said, well, we had to do it. It's just like, collateral damage, no big deal. Everybody would be rightfully furious. Now, but on the media, and I have a couple more points here. They're the ones who ginned up the need to strike ISIS in the first place.
Right.
So every time either Jen Psaki or Joe Biden went up to the podium, they were like, what are you gonna do about ISIS K? Are you gonna murder them yet? Why aren't you killing them? What are you doing about the Taliban? How come are you gonna go back in? You're not going back in. Are you gonna let this stand? So Biden had to come out, and if you remember, we chastised him for it. We've supported him for the withdrawal throughout, but he came out and said, we're gonna kill the hell out of him, right? Because this is the dumb stuff that happens in America. And when we're bloodthirsty, everybody applauds. When the other guys do it, oh my God, barbaric terrorists. They are. But what are we? What are we? But our media never asks that question because that's an uncomfortable question. In fact, they do the opposite.
Right.
They egg on the violence. And then, by the way, this report's in the media, which told you I just quoted CNN, right? But what happens? They quote it, they give the Pentagon perspective, and then they have collective amnesia. And the next time that, for example, a brutal dictator like Assad does a chemical weapons attack and some kids die, we're all rightfully outraged, right? And then the media takes the pictures and puts them all over television. Oh, kids dead, kids dead, kids dead. We have to do the bombing. We have to do the bombing. When is Trump gonna do the bombing, right? And then when he does it, they go, oh, beautiful bombs, beautiful bombs. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't be outraged by Assad's actions. We're pretty clear on the record that you should be outraged by that. I'm not, and Taliban and ISIS, you should definitely be outraged. But we should also think about our own actions. And we should be outraged when we kill civilians and kids. And we should be outraged that our media is not at all even-handed about it.
Right.
It almost sounds like they have an agenda for more war, both in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, you name it. And whenever it suits their agenda for more war, they show dead kids on the screen.
Right.
Whenever it doesn't suit their agenda, no dead kids on the screen.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right about that. And look, I think that these types of stories and these types of discussions are important to have because it's not in any way an attempt to launder the reputations of terrorists there. But it is, in my opinion, also a foreshadowing moment because it makes me worry that while there are headlines everywhere, I'm getting news alerts nonstop about how we've withdrawn completely. Today marks the final day of our war in Afghanistan. I don't believe that it's our final day of war in Afghanistan. So obviously they like to make a distinction regarding boots on the ground versus doing airstrikes and drone strikes. Implementing sanctions. There are different ways of engaging in war. And the fact that you have members of the media and various pundits on cable news urging the Biden administration to retaliate against ISIS, it's all about continuing the war, but in a different form. Maybe we don't have US troops there, but at the same time, we're gonna continue carrying out airstrikes or drone strikes. And part of the problem is we're not really getting much transparency from the Biden administration or the Pentagon in regard to what they plan on doing. Biden had a lot of tough talk for ISIS-K. He said that he would retaliate, that they would pay for what they did, but there have been really no details about what this alleged, counterterrorism strategy really is. And I'm worried that this will just be like a different form and a continuation of the war in Afghanistan. And by the way, we're supposed to be cooperating with the Taliban to get people out of Afghanistan. The Taliban wasn't notified about this at all. So they were angry that the United States carried out this operation without notifying them, without talking to them. The Taliban, which is now in control of Afghanistan, condemned the strike later Sunday, saying the US had violated the country's sovereignty. Bilal Karimi, the Taliban spokesperson, said that it was not right to conduct operations on other soil and that the US should have informed the Taliban. Whenever the US conducts such operations, we condemn them. Now, I have no love for the Taliban, of course I don't, but remember, the Taliban and ISIS, they're enemies, they're rivals, they do not get along. And to your point, Cenk, the media has been trying to somehow persuade Americans that the Taliban and ISIS are working together, basically to convince Americans or to manufacture consent to remain in Afghanistan.
Yeah, and there's another element to it too. I mean, now of course there's a little bit of bigotry mixed in there. ISIS, Taliban, they're all Muslims, who can tell, right? And by the way, the Palestinians also Muslims, and all Muslims understand is violence. That's why you have to occupy them forever, whether it's 20 years in Afghanistan or 50, 60 years in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. So this is a very familiar theme that the media has built up over a long period of time. So don't tell me that our media doesn't support violence. Yeah, on Afghan television, there might be a couple of rifles in the back, but in our case, we are way more sophisticated in pushing massive bombings and invasions of countries that lead to a lot more deaths, and we do it through our media. So, and now on the Taliban and ISIS, look, we're forced to state obvious things because of the demagoguing in the media in America and by the right wing. So who would the Taliban and ISIS kill first? Well, me and Anna, all right? They would kill me because I'm a apostate Muslim. I left Islam. It's the worst thing there is. They'd kill me first. And then Anna, being a woman and being strong and open, etc.
Pretty mouthy, yeah.
Yeah, we're goners. So are we in favor of Taliban or ISIS? Of course not, right? Now, having said that, should we coordinate with Taliban? Of course we should. They're telling us, they're giving us a relatively safe exit out, and they haven't done any bombings. If they had started to do bombings, we wouldn't have had 13 service members dead. We would have had hundreds dead. We would have had thousands of our Afghan allies dead already. We made a deal. We made a deal with people who were our enemies. That's who you make deals with. And ISIS-K is the one that attacked us. So should we coordinate with the Taliban against a worse enemy of ISIS-K? Yes, for the moment being, we should. For example, Stalin was a terrible, terrible dictator. And we made a deal with him to fight Hitler, who was worse.
Yeah.
That's called real life. But if you do that in America, oh my God, Biden made a deal with the Taliban. This is how dumb our media is. Biden made a deal with the Taliban. I guess he's a Muslim fundamentalist, he likes terrorism. And then you have to bother debating guys that are, let's put it this way, that have no honest intent at all.
Exactly, they have profit motives in mind. And that's what's fueling much of the discourse that you see in corporate media.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.